Hello, as always, I am Cosmic, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Age of Decadence, which is a Roman-inspired fantasy top-down CRPG. The game was developed by Iron Tower Studios, and it was greenlit back in 2013 on Steam after several years in development, and then from greenlight it went into Steam's early access program. AOD tries to harken back to the time of the old Fallout and Planescape RPGs, and thus describes itself as a hardcore RPG due to its high level of difficulty. The game is set in a low fantasy post-apocalyptic universe that is reminiscent of the decay of the Roman Empire. Essentially, imagine a global apocalypse has befallen the ancient world, and there you'll have the world of AOD. AOD is a rare breed of RPG that doesn't focus on being the hero and taking on hordes of evil. In fact, the combat in the game is severely difficult, and it's one of the hardest ways to progress in the game. AOD focuses more on just surviving in a difficult world. A smooth-talking, persuasive character is just as, if not more powerful than a strength-focused warrior, simply because they can manipulate and talk their way out of a confrontation. AOD takes a, dare I say, more sadistic approach in its mechanics, in that it's not overly simplified, and it certainly takes a more traditional pen and paper approach, which for people like me is great, however others will certainly not find any pleasure of it. Before you even start the game, there's a fair warning that the game is very tough, and that combat is so tough you will in all likelihood die. While the turn-based combat is hard, the game is not about killing your enemies with a sword. Instead, it's more about progressing through the story in a morally grey world. Characters in the world will not think twice about lying and stealing from you, and it's important to be very aware that everyone in the game is out for themselves and don't have the super loyal friendly characters of the more mainstream RPGs. So let's first start with character creation. Character creation, and thus your character build, is utterly crucial in this game. This is one of those games that should you mess up your build, it is entirely possible that you will reach a point later in the game that it is impossible to progress past due to your build. Character appearance customization options are limited. You can choose to be a male or female character, which does provide unique content depending on your gender. However, above that, there's not much you can do to make a totally unique looking character. Choosing a character's background affects the starting reputation of factions and how the main attributes are distributed at the start. However, these can be changed, and even more importantly, it will affect the starting events and quests of the game. While the background you choose does have an effect on the game, it's important to note that these are not classes. The game is skill-based and not class-based, and in fact your skills and attributes will get checked in combat and dialogue on a regular basis. There are several main attributes that range from strength to charisma. These attributes affect skills and are regularly checked in the game's various situations. There are a ton of skills to invest in, which are divided into combat skills and civil skills. The way AOD is designed and how difficult the skill and attribute checks are, it's important to specialise in a few things rather than trying to be a jack of all trades, as not only will hybriding make the game more difficult, but it could lead, like I said, to an impassable point. The game focuses on choice and consequence in a big way. There are often multiple ways to solve quests. Each choice and each outcome has their own respective consequences. The story of the game is fairly interesting and enjoyable, and it's set more of a mystery that you really need to play several playthroughs as different characters to get the full view of the overarching story. Because you'll each play through with different characters, you will get different perspectives each time. There's plenty of quest content in the game to take part in, and often some quests interchange and they can actually affect the outcome of another. The game has several factions, each with respective reputations, and your reputation will affect not only the availability of quests, but how well you are treated by those factions. I, in fact, was exiled from one faction's town in my first hour of playing. Now, like I've said, the game is not about combat, so having a silver tongue is often an easier and more enjoyable path. However, there are just some situations where people are stubborn and wish to draw blades, in which case you do have to be prepared. Now, while the game does feature turn-based combat, this is not the turn-based combat of a game like XCOM. This is in-depth combat that focuses more on stats and variable factors. Everything will affect hit chances, attack ratings and defense ratings. Things such as heavy armor will reinforce things like the block abilities and mitigate a lot more damage, but for example, doing that while you do gain defense bonuses, it will massively penalize your hit chance and your attack rating. Everything in combat is done using action points. Even swapping out your inventory items in the heat of battle will cause you to use AP. The items you have equipped will also affect AP. For example, heavy armor will limit your max AP regardless of your attributes. Each weapon has several attacks, such as fast, regular, power, etc. Each has a varying degree of damage, but each will also have a varying degree of hit chance success, depending on the opponent. For example, a fast attack will have a higher hit chance, but low damage, and it will be very effective against lightly armoured opponents. However, it will be completely negated against heavily armoured individuals. Combat is fun, but it's rough around the edges. It can be very frustrating and very unfair at points. The combat certainly does feel unbalanced at times, particularly with the hit chances. Not only is getting a high hit chance difficult, but missing an attack on 90% or up does tend to cause great amounts of salt. So while the combat does have its good and bad points, where the game shines is in its story, setting and non-linear progression in both terms of character progression and storyline progression. There are over 600,000 lines of dialogue in the game, and each conversation has different outcomes and choices depending on your skills and attributes. This allows for each playthrough to be quite different from the last, and you may find different solutions to the same quest with different characters. The various plot lines of all the quests give you the sense of being a private eye type figure, in that often things are not what they appear to be on the surface, and characters are often hiding their true motives. The game is all text-based, which may put people off, as it's important to read and pull out what people are trying to say in the text. However, it is sad that there is no voice acting, as it would have been the perfect game for some really good voice work. Graphically, the game is dated, and there are a number of issues including tearing throughout. I myself had several game crashes, so you can expect there to be various bugs in the game. While the graphics and art style certainly are not everything, it certainly would have been nice to have a prettier looking game, and it does look extremely rough in most parts. On the sound side of things, there's not much there. What is there works and does the job, but it sounds more like generic backing music and not something that's specialised for the game that really gets the blood pumping in the serious situations. AOD is one of those games that I think ultimately you will either love it or you'll hate it depending on what you want from it. If you're looking for a combat-focused game that's very straightforward, frankly, this is not it. However, if you like trial and error and prefer dialogue over combat, then it certainly may be for you. The game has a ton of depth to it, to the point that I certainly felt it was overdone in places like the combat. That said, however, I can certainly see why fans of old school stat-based CRPGs and PnP games will find great value here. For me, I think it's a great game that has depth and plenty of character to boot. It's certainly a diamond in the rough, and if you can get past the superficial issues and some of the more aggravating mechanics, then what you will have is a game that has a ton of replayability that you'll be able to dump hours upon hours into. I love the choice and consequence system, I love the dialogue, I love the fact that the way you invest into your character does actually mean something, and that if you're not careful you can just completely screw yourself later. And I think that everything in the game tries to have meaning to the point of, it's about investing and making sure that you made the right decision, and make sure you're committed to one aspect of your character, and then really see all the choices that you made through. And that is my review of the Age of Decadence. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Do like, subscribe, and leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.